The subject I chose for my mental health disorder project is Tony Stark. Tony Stark is 46 years old and he is the CEO of Stark Industries. The disease that I diagnosed Tony Stark with is post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. A little bit of background about this is that PTSD happens when someone goes through a traumatic experience and everyday things like a car moving or a loud noise trigger their past experience and make them have a mental break or a panic attack. So, how long has PTSD been around? The first documented case of post-traumatic stress disorder was the Civil War. The disorder was found by a soldier telling somebody that he felt anxiety of situations, and then the person that he told dove deeper and found out that he felt anxiety of situations that were similar to a previous situation. Originally, the treatment for the disease was nothing because nobody really saw it as a disease since mental health hasn't really been a issue since recently. So, if you had PTSD, most doctors would just write you off. The symptoms of PTSD are anxiety attacks, nightmares, hypervigilance, and social isolation. There's also self-destructive behavior and others that are not very good. Re-experience, avoidance, or numbing are the three things that a therapist or a doctor needs to see in order to diagnose PTSD. To treat PTSD, there's a drug called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or SSRI, and that drug is given to soldiers, most of the time soldiers, since soldiers go through such a stressful life on the battlefield, they are most likely to have PTSD. So the therapist will give them SSRI, and also therapy is a treatment for PTSD. And then if you go to a psychiatrist, that can also help because most of the time just talking out a mental disorder will help. Some exercises and diets will help PTSD subjects, but it all depends on what the original stressor or experience was that triggered PTSD in the subject. So Tony Stark, a little bit of background is, he is famous for being the CEO of his own tech conglomerate and also becoming the superhero Iron Man. The age at diagnosis for Tony Stark was 44. His trigger was going through a wormhole and not having any oxygen to breathe, causing him to pass out and fall back through the wormhole, then having to be resuscitated, which left him with panic attacks and nightmares that made it difficult for him to work in modern day life. His symptoms, like I said, are panic attacks, mental breaks, and nightmares. What Tony Stark does to cope with his PTSD is he makes more Iron Man suits. He does something he enjoys, and he just goes over his hobby over and over and over again. So the healthy things that Tony Stark does is he is in a relationship, he works out, and he goes to a therapist. But the unhealthy things that he does are using his coping mechanism for stressful situations. This unhealthy behavior is very severe to Tony Stark's lifestyle because since he already has PTSD, more stressful situations could either trigger that experience over and over again during an already stressful experience, or he could have multiple stressors or triggers that could make it more difficult for him and have a more advanced PTSD disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder. So the problems that PTSD gives Tony Stark is not being able to talk about the situation in normal everyday life because it just brings back bad memories, or people asking him how he dealt with it. That also gives him a panic attack and a nervous break. So that is Tony Stark and his post traumatic stress disorder.